Today, we are going to get into some fascinating and honestly really important neuroscience. We're talking about how military service literally reshapes the brains of young recruits to prepare them for combat. And our guide for this is a synthesis of research from Dr. Ronnie Rodas. Now, what makes his perspective so powerful is that he's not just an academic. He's a former U.S. Army sergeant who's been to combat zones. He went through this exact military indoctrination himself right from day one of basic training. So he's seen it from both sides. Okay, let's get into it.
The entire military training system is really built to answer one single question. What does it take to not just survive, but to win in some of the most dangerous places on Earth? And the answer? Well, it isn't just about being physically strong or having the right gear. It goes way, way deeper than that. The answer is that it takes profound adaptations. The brain itself has to change. But, and this is the whole point of what we're talking about today, there's a catch. The very changes that keep a soldier alive in a war zone can make it incredibly difficult to come back home and just be a civilian again. So how does this actually happen? How do you build a combat-ready brain? Let's break it down piece by piece. This model from Dr. Rodas's work is basically our roadmap. It lays out the whole process so clearly. You start with certain inputs, which trigger these specific mechanisms of adaptation. And those mechanisms, they create the short-term outputs you want. A soldier who's effective under pressure. But they also create long-term risks. We're going to walk through this whole thing step by step. So let's start with that first part of our roadmap, the inputs. The whole process really kicks off during what the research calls a high-impact developmental window. In the U.S. Army, you can enlist at 17 with your parents' permission. 17. Now, that number is significant, not just because it's young, but because of what's going on inside the brain at that exact age. So, what does this really mean? Well, the teenager young adult brain is incredibly plastic. It's super adaptable, like wet clay. The prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain that's like the CEO, in charge of impulse control and managing emotions, it's still a work in progress. And that makes young recruits uniquely ready to be shaped by the intense, highly structured world of military training. Okay, so that brings us to the real core of the story, the actual mechanisms the military uses to forge these powerful adaptations. First up is something called re-socialization. Think about basic training. Its whole purpose is to systematically break down your old civilian identity and rebuild you into something new. Your sense of self shifts from me to we. You're not just you anymore, you're a soldier, a part of a team. And that is absolutely essential for working together when everything is on the line. Then you've got this massive cultural pressure. The whole warrior ethos is built on rewarding stoicism, on controlling your emotions. Because, look, in a firefight, panic can get you and your friends killed. So emotional control isn't just a good idea, it's a critical survival tool. The danger, of course, is when that tool becomes the only one you know how to use, even when you're back home. And then there's the physical side of it, this idea of allostatic load. Think of it as the total wear and tear on your body from just being constantly stressed out. All the high stress drills, the lack of sleep, the deployments, it forces your body's entire stress response system to recalibrate. Your body literally learns to live in a state of high alert. And this is what's happening on a neural level. It's like the brain's alarm system, the amygdala, gets its volume dial cranked all the way to 11. It becomes hypersensitive to any hint of a threat. And at the same time, the brain's brakes, the prefrontal cortex, basically learns to get out of the way and let that threat-focused state run the show. The whole system gets retuned for survival in a dangerous world. And look, these mechanisms, they absolutely work. They create incredibly effective soldiers, but that effectiveness comes with a trade-off. It creates this kind of dual-use mental toolkit where the skills that save your life over there can become a real burden back here. This chart just lays it out perfectly. On the left, you've got what you need for performance under danger. But look at the right. Rapid compliance can turn into hypervigilance, always being on edge. Threat-focused attention can lead to relational detachment, pushing people away. That life-saving emotional control can become emotional numbing. The very things that make someone effective in combat can become the symptoms of PTSD or moral injury down the road. And the data from all the sources reviewed in this study really backs this up. The biggest theme that came up again and again, the tallest bar here, is all about post-service friction. The number one challenge, according to the research, is that these combat-ready adaptations don't have an off switch. They just keep running long after a service member takes off the uniform. It's also really important to understand the difference between two of the biggest risks here. PTSD, you can think of that as a wound of fear. It's driven by that overactive threat alarm in the brain. But moral injury is different. It's a wound of the conscience. It comes from doing something that violates your own moral code or from being betrayed by your leaders. It leads to this deep crisis of guilt, shame, and a loss of meaning. So, after all this profound rewiring, what's the path back home? The good news is the research doesn't just point out the problem, it actually proposes a pretty clear and practical way forward. And here's the key idea. The goal isn't to erase the training. You don't want to undo those adaptations. They're valuable skills. The real challenge is helping soldiers develop an off-ramp, teaching them how to switch contexts, how to turn down that combat-ready brain when they're home with their family. The research lays out 4 key steps. First, build self-regulation skills like controlled breathing right into basic training and frame them as tools to make you a better soldier. Second, leaders have to actively fight the stigma against getting mental health support. Third, we need transition programs that are specifically designed to teach these off-ramping skills for civilian life. And fourth, we have to recognize that some wounds are moral, and we need to provide support for moral repair, not just trauma care. This quote just sums it all up perfectly. There's no single magic bullet. It's a combination of things: leadership setting the right tone, a culture that drops the stigma, and real structured support. Those are the levers that can make all the difference between these skills being a tool and then becoming a lifelong burden. And that really leaves us with a final, really important question to think about. Now that we understand just how deep these neurological and psychological changes go, how can we as a society do a better job of building the bridges needed to support those who have to walk this incredibly difficult path, from soldier back to civilian?